I'm giving away $10 cash to a random winner in the comments of my most recent giveaway video, and every time that video gets another 10,000 views, we're going to have another winner. So all you need to do to enter is click the link below and watch the video. In the majority of episodes of Unsung Heroes, we tend to discuss cars that have some kind of weird, controversial backstory or a crazy event that happened at some point in its life, something that maybe stopped it from finishing a race, or maybe it didn't even qualify in the first place, some kind of crazy little thing like that. As far as this episode, it's actually much more simple. This is essentially just one guy's idea for a car that he wanted, which got made, and then kind of fell into obscurity for somewhat understandable but still unfortunate reasons. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with TWR, or Tom Wilkinshaw Racing, they are a relatively small but very impressive British brand who tend to do a lot of work with Jaguars. You could think of them as being in a similar category to Lister. And of course they notably helped an XJ220 to win Le Mans, but it later unfortunately was disqualified on the technicality of its fuel tank, and most notably on a production car scale, they did of course produce my favourite version of the Jaguar XJ220, the iconic TWR XJ220S, which has the rear wing, extended chin splitter, a black roof, very loud colours, and pretty incredible performance. A 225 mile an hour XJ220 way back in the 90s. It's one of the rarest and most sought after XJ220s in the world. Now this car is nowhere near as famous as that one. And that one's super rare, because this car is a one-off, and I love the story behind this, because this car was not intended for racing. It wasn't some homologated street car to allow the Aston Martin DB7 to race, none of that. Tom Wilkinshaw just wanted a car, and what he actually wanted was a Ferrari 456, a big front-engine GT V12. However, that would have kind of been a little bit bad for him to be driving that and working with Jaguar and Aston and TWR, so instead, he decided to have a car made for himself. And naturally, what better place to look than to the Aston Martin DB7, which was already out at the time, and combine that with their extensive technology and experience with Jaguar racing engines. So that's exactly what they did. This is a monster of a DB7 because the engine is a 6-litre Jaguar V12, but not just any V12, it just so happens to be a detuned version of the V12 engines that they used in the Jaguar XJR and XJS race cars. Yes, even including Group C race cars. Now, of course, it's detuned a lot to be allowed on the street, but still, they didn't just leave it at that. In fact, the engine is detuned, but then tuned up again in a different way. The engine, for instance, is bored out to a 6.4-litre V12, which is massive by British standards. It has an uprated crank, valves, it even has a pretty special chain drive camshaft, and the performance is far superior to any DB7 at the time. 475 horsepower is what this is working with, a very impressive 470 pound-feet of torque. It has an AP Racing clutch, a Zytec ECU, a Borg-Warner T56 manual gearbox with 6 speeds, of course, still rear-wheel drive, and the 6th gear is longer as well, which allows the car to have a top speed of 182 miles an hour. In other words, the TWR DB7 is essentially the ultimate Aston Martin of the 90s, at least in a road car sense. Now, only one of these was ever produced, and it was actually redesigned by Ian Callum himself, and of course you can tell immediately the visual changes. It has slightly wider arches, new wheels, of course the dominant rear wing, and even that very TWR XJ220 style chin splitter, which some people may like, some people may not. I personally certainly see the appeal of the cleaner, normal DB7 design, but still, you've got to set this one apart, and this one certainly does that. And incidentally, this car had all of that power going to the road through Yokohama tyres, which everyone who drove it and tested it were very impressed by, because apparently the car could still be basically on the borderline of wheel spinning even in 3rd gear at up around 70 or 80 miles an hour. It was incidentally proven to be capable of over 180 on an airfield, so this isn't just pie-in-the-sky stuff, it is a serious super sports car of the 90s, and even though only that one was ever built, It is interesting to know that despite this car's subsequent history, where of course it was built primarily for Tom Wilkinshaw, they were kind of hoping, and I'm sure even a couple of executives were kind of hoping, that this new TWR version could, in a similar vein to the TWR XJ220S, be a limited run, almost homologation style build for the DB7. Ultimately, though, due to Ford at the time wanting their own V12 to be used, that never happened, unfortunately. However, don't be sad about that, because even though you could say it would have been much cooler to have this version, which I agree with, ultimately this car still proved a very important point, and it's a point which the car simply does not get the credit which it deserves for. And that is, it proved that the DB7 was more than capable enough to go on to have much more power with a larger V12 and still cope admirably with that extra power and performance, because that is exactly what this car did. So in other words, you could pretty justifiably argue that despite the fact that this is certainly an unsung hero with only one produced, initially a very personal project, and ultimately it was killed, like many things, by executives, it still has a massive ripple effect on not just the DB7, but probably even the development of other Astons since then, which themselves evolved from the DB7. The DB9, for instance, who knows what kind of knowledge and experience was carried over from this and other DB7s into that car's production. So yes, it's an unsung hero, but it's still a very important car. It proved what the DB7 could do. It was in effect like a rolling test bed at the same time as being a TWR personal creation, and I think the car does deserve more credit than it's got. And incidentally, the car was later on sold to a private collection after Tom Wilkinshaw owned it. So it's, to me, a very interesting little change from a lot of the cars that we talk about. It wasn't some big grand plan of a race car or some crazy world-changing concept. It was just a car that a guy wanted, so he made it. And then, unfortunately, for unsurprising reasons, it never got produced. Thankfully, though, some of TWR's other creations, like the aforementioned XJ220, did reach production. At least, limited production. So yeah, I think this is a very cool car, and if you are a fan of it, of course, and if you're new to Unsung Heroes, you should slap the link down below, jump over to the Discord chat, which is totally free, of course, and you can actually vote on all of your favourite cars from this series so far. But that's it overall for this episode, of course. I will see you next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.